Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Welcome to the looming ramparts of Elsinore. Before us lies the setting of William Shakespeare's longest and arguably most complex masterpiece, Hamlet. Looking at this fortress shrouded in mist, we aren't just seeing a castle. We're witnessing a pressure cooker of treachery, poisonous politics, and a desperate quest for justice. But here is the central question we must ask ourselves. What happens when the pursuit of righting a wrong destroys everything in its path? In this series, we'll unravel how a ghost's demand for revenge spirals into tragic, unintended consequences. But before we walk these dark halls, we need to understand why this specific story still haunts our culture today, starting with how it fundamentally rewired our language and philosophy. While the treachery at Elsinore drives the plot, have you ever wondered why this specific tragedy still haunts us centuries later? The truth is, Hamlet is woven into the very fabric of how we speak today. You might be quoting the Prince of Denmark without even realizing it. If you've ever said you had to be cruel to be kind, or described a fright as making your hair standing on end, that is Shakespeare speaking through you. But it's more than just clever phrases. As the critic Harold Bloom observed, this play stands alongside the world's great scriptures as a supreme meditation on our own fragility in the face of death. It is a genre-defying masterpiece, somehow managing to be gripping, funny, and philosophical all at once. So, with the weight of this legacy in mind, let's turn our eyes to the castle ramparts, where the political tension is breaking and something unnatural is about to appear. If the play's philosophy is what keeps it alive today, its opening scene is what immediately grips you by the throat. We leave the abstract behind and step directly onto the freezing, mist-covered ramparts of Elsinore Castle. Look at the terror on that soldier's face. Why is the air so thick with paranoia? It isn't just the bitter cold. Shakespeare establishes a dual threat right away. First, there is a political crisis. The kingdom is on high alert, preparing for war against young Fortinbras of Norway, who is marching to reclaim lands lost by his father. The guards are exhausted and on edge. But what truly deepens the anxiety is the supernatural element. For 2 nights, a silent, terrifying figure has appeared, the ghost of the late King Hamlet. Notice he isn't dressed in royal robes, but in full armor. This is an omen of violence. The state of Denmark is indeed rotten, caught between looming war and restless spirits. The guards are out of their depth, and they know they need to fetch the prince. But as we move inside the castle, we'll find that the corruption among the living is far more dangerous than any ghost. While the guards tremble in the darkness outside, inside the castle the wine is flowing. The contrast is intentional and jarring. Here we encounter the new king, Claudius, and queen, Gertrude. They are in the midst of a decadent celebration, having married less than 2 months after the former king's death. But isolated from this revelry is Prince Hamlet. To him, Denmark is no longer a noble kingdom. It has become an unweeded garden, a place of corruption and decay. He views his mother's hasty remarriage to his uncle as not just disrespectful, but incestuous. He even bitterly jokes that the funeral-baked meats were coldly repurposed for the wedding feast. For the moment, Hamlet feels powerless. He resolves to hold his tongue, even if his heart breaks in the process. However, this suppression of anger is temporary, because the ghost we saw on the ramparts is about to give Hamlet a reason to speak. While Hamlet was already deeply disturbed by the corruption of the court, the story now takes a supernatural turn on the dark tower walls. Following a tip from his friend Horatio, Hamlet encounters the apparition, and his worst fears are confirmed. This isn't just a wandering spirit, it is the ghost of Hamlet's father, suffering in purgatory. And he hasn't come just to haunt the castle, he's come to correct the history books. The ghost reveals that the snake that stung him was actually his own brother, Claudius. In a truly blood-curdling account, we learn that Claudius poured poison into the king's ear while he slept, stealing his life, his crown, and his queen in one fell swoop, an act the ghost calls damned incest. The command is absolute. Hamlet must kill the smiling, damned villain to cleanse Denmark. But how do you enact revenge against a sitting king without alerting the guards? As we'll see in the next scene, Hamlet realizes he must hide his lethal intent behind a mask of madness. Armed with the ghost's terrifying revelation, a typical revenge hero might charge into the throne room, sword drawn. But Hamlet? Hamlet is a thinker. He realizes that to cleanse the cancer of corruption in Denmark without destroying the state itself, he needs to be surgical. So how does one hide their intentions from a paranoid king? By hiding in plain sight. Hamlet adopts what he calls an antic disposition. Essentially, he decides to feign madness. Look at the duality in the visual here. He deliberately acts strange and odd to confuse his enemies and mask his true investigation. And the performance is convincing. It leaves Ophelia terrified. She describes the once charming prince as a broken instrument, looking as piteous as if he'd been recently released out of hell. But while this mask of madness buys him time, it also draws dangerous attention, causing the king to wonder if there's a method to this madness. So we've established that Hamlet is feigning madness to mask his true intentions. But in the claustrophobic halls of Elsinore, privacy is a myth. As you can see here, the castle transforms into a court of spies, where character flaws become dangerous weapons. Look at the image on the left. This represents Polonius and his fatal vice, hubris. He arrogantly believes he's the only one who can see the truth. He convinces himself that Hamlet is simply mad with lovesickness for his daughter, Ophelia. In his arrogance, he actually turns Ophelia into bait, arranging for the two lovers to meet while he hides behind a curtain to eavesdrop, a decision that will literally be his undoing. On the right, we have King Claudius, driven by paranoia. He senses a method in Hamlet's madness that threatens his crown. He goes so far as to weaponize friendship, recruiting Hamlet's old schoolmates, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, to spy on the prince. But Hamlet isn't easily trapped. He recognizes his friends have become, as he puts it, sponges, soaking up the king's rewards, only to be wrung dry when they are no longer useful. Hamlet knows he is being watched from every shadow. So, if an audience is already gathered, why not give them a performance that will reveal the truth once and for all? While Claudius and Polonius are busy lurking in the shadows, Hamlet decides to turn the tables using a psychological weapon of his own: theater. You have to remember, Hamlet is a scholar at heart. He isn't content to simply trust a ghost that could be a demon in disguise. He demands empirical proof. So, when a traveling acting troupe arrives at Elsinore, Hamlet constructs his famous mousetrap. He asks the actors to perform a play about a regicide, but secretly instructs them to insert a new scene, one that perfectly mirrors the ghost's story of poison being poured into the ear. His plan is simple but brilliant. He will watch his uncle's face for a flinch of guilt. As he famously declares, "The play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king." And the trap snaps shut. Upon seeing his own crime reenacted on stage, Claudius panics and halts the performance, unable to bear the sight of his own sin. Hamlet now has the undeniable proof he needed. But, unfortunately, this surge of adrenaline is about to push him from careful planning into a reckless action that will cost an innocent man his life. Armed with the certainty of his uncle's guilt, Hamlet finally has the motive to strike. Yet, in a supreme moment of irony, he hesitates. Finding Claudius deep in prayer, Hamlet stays his hand, reasoning that killing a repenting man would send him straight to heaven rather than the hell he deserves. But that calculated restraint vanishes moments later. Storming into his mother's chambers, Hamlet enters a state of high frenzy. When he hears a noise behind the tapestry, he doesn't think, he strikes. Looking at the illustration, you see the result of that rash impulse, a sword plunging through the fabric, spilling not the king's blood, but that of the meddling, intruding fool, Polonius. This is the tragedy's pivotal turning point. By spilling innocent blood, Hamlet has inadvertently become the very thing he despised, a murderer. And as we'll see next, this single, senseless death hands his enemies the perfect weapon to destroy him. That single, impulsive thrust of Hamlet's sword through the tapestry didn't just kill Polonius, it shattered the court's fragile stability. As we see here, the fallout splits into two tragic directions. First, look to the left. We witness the heartbreaking collapse of Ophelia. Already wounded by Hamlet's cruel rejection, the shock of her father's murder breaks her mind completely, leading to her madness and eventual drowning. Simultaneously, her brother Laertes returns from France. Unlike Hamlet, Laertes is a man of action. Fueled by fire and grief, he raises a rebellion, initially ready to tear the king from his throne. But this is where Claudius shows his true political genius. Rather than fighting this insurrection, he weaponizes it. As the puppet master on the right illustrates, Claudius redirects Laertes' hot-headed rage away from himself and squarely toward the prince. He has found a willing executioner. Now he only needs to design the perfect trap to ensure Hamlet never walks away. With Laertes now firmly under his thumb, Claudius orchestrates the tragedy's climax, a trap disguised as sport. It's crucial to recognize that this is actually the king's second attempted murder. Remember, the first attempt, exiling Hamlet to England with a secret death warrant, failed spectacularly when Hamlet outwitted his captors and escaped back to Denmark. So desperation breeds a more brutal strategy, a friendly fencing match. The plot relies on two fatal backups. First, the sword. While Hamlet fences with a blunt practice weapon, Laertes will wield a sharpened blade, its tip anointed with a lethal poison. A mere scratch spells death. But what happens if Hamlet's skill protects him from the blade? Claudius prepares a failsafe, the wine. A poisoned chalice, ready to be offered the moment the prince works up a thirst. Every exit is barred. Death seems inevitable. Yet, as Claudius and Laertes frantically secure these traps, Hamlet is approaching this moment not with fear, but with a haunting, stoic acceptance that we will explore next. So, while Claudius and Laertes have been busy plotting a deadly trap with poison and swords, the Hamlet who returns to Denmark is a fundamentally changed man. Gone is the frantic, indecisive prince. In his place is someone much colder and far more resolved. Think about how he handles his old schoolmates, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. He discovers their betrayal and sends them to their deaths without a second thought, chillingly telling Horatio, "They are not near my conscience." This new attitude comes from a shift toward a stoic philosophy. Look at the visual here. Hamlet in the graveyard holding the skull of Yorick. He realizes that death is the great equalizer. Whether you are a beggar or Alexander the Great, we all return to the same dust. This leads to his ultimate realization that while we can try to rough hew or crudely carve our own paths, there is a divinity that shapes our ends. We are not fully in control. And this is why, even though he senses a trap in the upcoming duel, he doesn't run. He accepts the invitation. He has reconciled himself to whatever fate has in store, unaware that the tragic end is rushing toward him faster than he thinks. With Hamlet having stoically accepted that the readiness is all, we plunge into the play's bloody finale. Here, Shakespeare delivers a masterclass in dramatic irony, where the villains are quite literally hoist with their own petard, blown up by their own bombs. First, look at Gertrude. Tragedy strikes when she ignores Claudius's warning and drinks from the poisoned cup meant for Hamlet. Whether an accident or a final act of maternal protection, she becomes the first victim of the king's plot. Next, the tension explodes with Laertes. In the scuffle, the rapiers are exchanged. The very blade he anointed with poison to guarantee Hamlet's death is turned against him. He is slain by his own treachery. And finally, Claudius. With the conspiracy laid bare, he suffers the ultimate poetic justice. Hamlet forces him to drink the poisoned wine and strikes him with the envenomed blade. The king dies by the very double trap he set for his nephew. As the smoke clears, the villain's ingenious traps have snapped shut on themselves. But the cost is catastrophic. With the court decimated and the prince himself mortally wounded, we must turn to the final moment to see who remains to speak the truth when the rest are silent. With the villains fallen by their own poisoned traps, the chaos of the duel finally subsides, bringing us to these haunting final moments. Here, the tone shifts from vengeance to reconciliation. Note how Hamlet and Laertes use their dying breaths not to curse, but to forgive one another, finally breaking the cycle of violence that consumed them both. But what becomes of Denmark? Look at the illustration provided. The crown lies on the floor, the sword is cast aside, the old corrupt era is over. Hamlet performs one last duty as prince. He names young Fortinbras of Norway as the new ruler. The figure standing in the light of the doorway represents this new beginning, ensuring the kingdom will not fall into anarchy. Finally, Hamlet turns to his only true friend, Horatio. He begs him to forego suicide and instead live on to tell my story. And consider this, by studying this play today, we are helping to fulfill Hamlet's dying wish. We affirm that storytelling has the power to make sense of tragedy. The rotten state has been cleansed, order is restored, and as the prince takes his final breath, the rest is silence.